Here's the what's what and the who's who for our panel, Race Matters.
The problems are not new, the violence is not new, and the racial divide definitely is not new. But the urgency to create change is at an all-time high.
49ers quarterback knelt instead of standing during the national anthem at last night's game.
We have cops that are murdering people. We have cops in the SFPD that are blatantly racist. And those issues need to be addressed.
You know, the reason these guys are kneeling, the reason we're locking arms is to bring people together, to make people aware that this is not right.
I am all for athletes speaking their mind, having opinions on social issues, even if I don't agree with it.
I am too.
But they need to understand those opinions will be challenged.
4 off-duty police officers providing security at the Minnesota Lynx game on Saturday staged a walk-off because of this. WNBA players wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts.
We taking tomorrow? No clue. Do what Master say.
Wow. All right. So Curry, Thompson, Green, Iguodala, all sitting out tonight.
We do with Massasay, and that has sparked quite a few headlines over the last few hours. Yeah, Chris Haynes tweeting this. Spoke with Andre Iguodala about Master Comment. He made it clear that in no way was he referring to Steve Kerr. It was an inside locker joke.
I think Mike Tomlin still needs to prove he's a great coach.
I don't think he's a great coach at all. He's a nice coach, and to me, I've said this. I've said he's really a great cheerleader guy.
Cheerleader guy, to me, maybe fall outside the bounds of critique or criticism. They probably fall more toward the area of disrespect and unprofessional.
That's one of our responsibilities as the undefeated, right? To have this platform to really educate. I mean, it's not an ancillary issue for us, right? This is our daily bread every day.
Sometimes I miss it, but for the most part, I've been spending time with my kids. I have 2 companies. And when he mentioned to me there was going to be a TEDx about disruption, naturally I thought, what would a TEDx about disruption be without a football player, right?
And the Ravens are the champions of the world.
Brian Billick has brought unbridled joy to his team, his city, earning a world championship in just his 2nd season.
Brian Billick joining the show, Super Bowl champion himself.
That's what makes it so spectacular, the sequence of things that had to happen and that the New England Patriots made happen for them to get this most incredible come-from-behind win.
I can go and tell the history. I can go tell this story about the LAPD and the black community in Los Angeles. I can examine OJ's rise to fame as a football star and as a commercial pitchman and really parse his racial identity.
Amazing. And the Oscar goes to OJ Made in America. Ezra Edelman and Caroline Waterlow.
The victims of police violence, police brutality, racially motivated violence, and criminal injustice. This is their story, as well as Ron and Nicole's. I am honored to accept this award on all their behalfs. Thank you.
Well, this is fun. Thanks, Andrea. Great to be here. Just a brief correction. I didn't go to the same high school with Sean Springs, but my son did. So I'm really wondering, I have a house that looks out at Springbrook High School in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I've been wondering if Sean was one of those kids that's kind of snuck through my yard back in the day.
Your neighborhood. I probably snuck through your yard. You were the grumpy old man that was throwing stuff.
Oh, man.
No, that wasn't.
And I was a Redskin fan. I cheered you on.
No, I'm just messing with you.
That was an opening. I wonder, looking at that collection of clips, the athletes, Kaepernick, from each of you, what stood out? What came to your mind when you saw that opening?
I guess for me, Colin Kaepernick he was mentioned earlier in the first panel, and what he did and taking a knee. When I first saw it, I had mixed feelings because if you're going to take a knee, and the only thing they showed was him taking a knee on the sideline, but they never talked about what he did in the community. I since learned that Colin has not just displayed his how he felt on the football field, but he also done something in the community. And my thing with athletes, if you're going to display and have this platform to be able to make a difference, not just do it on the football field, but make sure you go out and do it in the community as well, and back up what you're standing and supporting.
Yeah, I found the previous panel was interesting. You know, my background being in football, where I've got 53 players, 14, 15 coaches, 10 developmental guys, large organization. And then you hear from the hockey or the basketball. My son-in-law plays for the Detroit Pistons. And you're talking about a 12, 15-man locker room. That's a different dynamic. And I found it interesting, and in terms of the dialogue, the different perspective, even on subjects like this, from an intimate locker room, like an NBA locker room may be, versus one in the NFL, where it's so much larger. And then to hear Mr. Dombrowski talk about not thinking about, okay, now culturally, you've got guys from virtually all over the world, and the differences, to me, again, that's the thing I love most about sports. I don't know that you could go to too many other professions where you could have that set of diversity and ideas that cut across culture and race, gender, whatever, the way you do, in that general classification of sports.
I thought about mostly watching the video, just the difference in where sports is now, the climate, the discourse versus earlier in my career when I first got into sports. When I first got into this business, and I've been a professional for a lot of years, the conversation around sports was largely about the games. And the sports writers and columnists that preceded me, they had been writing and covering sports at a time that was more volatile. Certainly, the society was changing and evolving, and I feel like there's a reincarnation of that time right now. So it just kind of reminded me of the different challenges I think that you have as a media person, whether you're a print journalist or on television, like I am, just that you just have to navigate so much more, and with so much more complexity and nuance than at any other time in my career.
And just to piggyback on both what Jamel said and what Sean said, for me it was just noticing how that pendulum has swung. Back from a time when I was growing up when you didn't hear black athletes be political at all. And now that there's a sense of empowerment and security to speak their mind. And that, first and foremost, along with the fact that I just remember, seeing Kaepernick take a knee, being supportive of that, but being deathly afraid that there wasn't going to be anything on the other end. And to see him so articulately express his sort of what was going on, having thought about the issues, to be able to convey that to the broader audience was, to me, the more important thing, in addition to what he's doing in the community. So that's what I thought. So
it does seem like, if we agree that athletes today are speaking out more on social and racial issues than they have maybe since that 60s period, why is that?
Is it fair to say that athletes are speaking out more, or is it the time has changed and you have social media? And I think there was probably, and I know my dad and the Cowboys, when he played in the 80s, Tony Dorsett and those guys who had that platform, Dallas was America's team, they were very vocal, but, I mean, maybe it was only heard because I heard them in my household. And now, today, those guys probably would have really been heard, but they didn't have social media. So I don't know if that's fair for us to say that they didn't speak out, but just wasn't heard as much as they are today.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry. No. I was going to say, but the way I think about this, I sort of think about it from the standpoint of, in the last 5 years, LeBron, first sort of after Trayvon Martin was killed, and sort of what he speaking out about it, and with the pictures of him and the Heat with the hoodies, I feel like him being, in some ways, a pioneer recently as someone who is impenetrable in terms of who he is, where he's gotten to from an endorsement standpoint, from a brand standpoint. So I think him leading the way, basically sending a message that I'm not afraid of my brand being hurt by speaking out. In fact, probably I'm going to use this platform. My sense is, and I don't know if this is true or not, it's empowered others to say, like, maybe this conversation where people before in the 70s or 80s who maybe were afraid of speaking out because they were protective of what they had, the gains, what they financially and otherwise, maybe that's fallen away a little bit, hopefully.
Yeah, I have to agree with Ezra there, because as much as we look at Colin Kaepernick as kind of the tipping point, that was kind of the first real significant, kind of protest. Maybe Mahmoud, that was the other one that I remember, but it generated a lot of conversation, but nothing, I think, like what we've seen with police brutality, certainly not with Colin Kaepernick. I think social media has removed this barrier of athletes feeling like they need the media. They can speak directly to their own audience. They can get out their own message. And I think because those layers are removed, that they feel more empowered to say things. And the way we're covering them is differently as well. I was asked earlier about the whole stick to sports movement. I was like, even if I wanted to, I couldn't. Greg Popovich isn't sticking to sports, right? So am I supposed to act like he didn't say that? And when Colin Kaepernick decided to kneel, we can't pretend that didn't happen. So I think there is so much of this is that the toothpaste is out. We can't push it back in the tube. And so it's brought us all to these sometimes uncomfortable cross-sections with each other. And whereas I think before we were kind of desensitized to it, because for most of my career, and certainly growing up, I think a lot of athletes were following more of the Michael Jordan model of be a pitch man, and even to some degree the O.J. Simpson model. Be a pitch man, be well-liked, don't ruffle any feathers. And I think as they've been able to see now in this different age where authenticity in itself has become a brand, I think they feel a lot more comfortable expressing who they are.
The concern, and I'll echo, I do a fair amount of clinics, coaching clinics, particularly for young athletes, young leagues. Was down in Orlando, and I don't get in front of coaches, youth coaches, high school coaches, that the number one question usually is, Coach, how do we get the message to our young people about the responsibility they have with their textings, their tweets, the idea, the vulnerabilities that they have, the things that we're talking about, that can be a huge asset, can be a huge voice, that is changing culture, that young people have to learn there are responsibilities that go with it. That's the number one question that's put to me as a coach. I left the NFL as a coach just before this wave of everybody tweeting out every thought that they have. And as a coach, and I'm speaking strictly as a coach from the business side, the concern I would have to have, and I know the coaches today, in terms of obviously you have to embrace everything, the passions that everybody has, but by the same token, how does that fall within the responsibility as you being a member of this team, and how do I help you with that at the same time making sure that you have a responsibility to me, to the organization, us to you, in that same, that was the thing to me with the Colin Kaepernick situation. I think it's a perfect example. LeBron James has the stature within the industry to do and say certain things that are going to be perceived a certain way versus a young athlete that's struggling. And the way it was received, I thought was interesting, because for young people to have those opinions, which is great, but you also have to recognize that form is going to be viewed differently, regrettably maybe, based on the credibility or the background you have. LeBron James can get away with saying a whole lot of things that someone else in a more vulnerable position may not understand. Whoa, wait a minute, I may not be in that same strength. I may have the same opinion. I may have to go about it a different way.
Is there something, Coach, to be said, though, for the different nature of the sports? The NBA is a players' league. LeBron not only is LeBron James and a superstar, but he has an incredible amount of leverage on any team he plays for. When he left Cleveland the first time, I believe the value of the franchise sunk like $150 million, right? So whether, even if the owner or somebody did have an issue, how much could they say? Whereas in football, it's a lot more uniform. whether you're Colin Kaepernick or Tom Brady, who toes the line a lot, especially when you think about recently when he's asked repeatedly about his relationship with Donald Trump. Is it the nature, because football is so owner and team driven, is there something to be said for the differences and how that's perceived?
We talked about earlier the size of the locker room, as I mentioned earlier. And again, having gotten to be around it a little bit more, and Coach Van Gundy and the Pistons has been very generous, and that's a strange world to me. It's a different locker room because of the size of the locker room and the way these guys interact with one another compared to the size of the organization I dealt with. So I think you're exactly right. There's a lot of different levels as to how that interaction happens. Well, and you're right, there's no one player. I remember the great Al McGuire when teams wanted him to come coach in the NBA. And he says, simple, yeah, I'll be glad to do it. I got one rule. I got to make $1 more than the highest paid player. Because he viewed that as saying, how do I coach somebody that's making more money than me? Well, you better get over that, because players make a whole lot more money than coaches, and you better understand that that's the business side of it right now, and you better be able to deal with that.
But isn't this sort of why, there's the nature of if speaking out is going to disrupt the locker room and how that's going to affect the team, and that's nice. That's not my issue. For me, the fact that Colin Kaepernick is more vulnerable than LeBron James, is playing in a sport with a different hierarchy, that he did put himself out there only speaks to how brave it was, and in turn how impactful it was in the conversation that started, which is why it's like I don't have enough respect for what he did, and it's so much more necessary because of that league and because of what it represents and because of essentially what the national anthem specifically in this league, that if you're someone like me, you have the flyovers, you have this sort of link between football and the military, and then in turn, I don't know, it's sort of like, again, from my standpoint, I'm not as concerned. I mean, granted, I'm not a 49ers fan,
I am.
But in terms of and I understand how young athletes need to be responsible for themselves, and if you are a coach or you're in an organization, you want to make sure that in terms of if you're going to tweet, if you're going to be outspoken, be protective. But I also sort of the notion that he set an example for people to say, you know what, it's beyond my well-being in this case. This is something, a statement that needs to be made, and in that way, I wish there were more.
So, Coach, you were like you said, you coached before the social media era, and how would you handle racial issues that might exist in a locker room? What was your method?
Yeah, there's as a coach, there's always, you recognize, and again, it's a very large and diverse locker room, and you recognize that if you're going to be successful, you heard Devin McCourty talk about it, that sense of, any championship team, you're going to hear about the brotherhood, the teamwork, we're together, you've got my back, you've got my back, I've got yours. Sean, obviously knows what we're talking about as well. That sense of team and that sense of responsibility to one another in a large, diverse locker room. As a coach, you're going to have an issue anytime politics, religion, race, sexuality finds itself into the locker room. That could be that point where it could tear it apart. I tell you, the biggest single problem I had as a head coach that was hard for me to deal with, we had a number of players of faith, and they each had a direction they wanted to go in terms of who they wanted to bring into the building, whether it be our fellowship services on Saturday night that you typically do, or on Sunday morning, the Bible studies during the course of the week that you want to embrace for your players. But you had the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and all these different organizations, all with the right idea in mind, but had different visions of the message they wanted to share, and started to create factions within the locker room to the point where I had to ban that from the building during the day. We embrace it. Look, we'll make the building available to you after hours. Whatever you want to do, we're going to facilitate for you. But guys, when you come to work in the morning until you leave, we got to hold that at arm's length, because it's creating, here's something that's a solid, good thing. It wants the players to be community members, responsible family members. They're saying the right message, but they come about it in a different way, where it was creating a real factions, and that's part of the issue in a large, business dynamic like that, to where you want to embrace, certainly and respect what a Colin Kaepernick did. The only difficulty, and I talked with Pete Carroll as they addressed it going forward, as the league did, and a couple other coaches, the difficulty for the coach was not to want to embrace and help Colin. It was the fact that Colin initially went outside the framework of the team and said, I'm just going to do this. And that's where the issue began in terms of, okay, we want to embrace your passions, but you have a responsibility. That's what I was talking about, the tweets. You have a responsibility to the rest of the team and to me and I to you to help you platform this. Use your celebrity as a platform. But you're within a team structure here, and we've got to honor that structure.
Well, it should be pointed out, too, that I believe Colin received the highest award at the end of the season that you can give a teammate. And you're right, at first he went outside the structure, but then he had a meeting with his teammates. They understood his point of view. There was certainly a difference of opinion, but they respected the fact that he came to them in the locker room and explained his position, explained why he was doing it. And I really, and to some degree, I hate the word distractions used in football because we throw everything into that pot, be it a protest, be it something criminal, be it, everything's a distraction. To me, a real distraction is if, Colin Kaepernick is 3rd and 5 and he's thinking about, am I kneeling tomorrow? That's a distraction. What stops you from doing your job on the field? And if it doesn't, then how is it really a distraction? I understand the media attention can create a swarm and a buzz. And so from a coach's standpoint, I get that you're trying to minimize kind of the headlines around your team. But the 49ers, in hindsight, should be thankful for Colin Kaepernick because considering how bad they were, he took away all the attention away from the fact that organization was in a lot of trouble. It prevented people from asking a whole lot of questions about what happened to the talent on that team.
I know, Ezra, I can see you want to say something.
No, you don't know where my mind just went. That's the first time I've ever going to link Donald Trump with Colin Kaepernick.
Now that's a great. You gotta share it.
I'm just saying in terms of even what happened yesterday and sort of why certain things are being done and what it's distracting from. That's. Sorry, I'm not trying to go there.
But Sean, when you were playing, did you have any racial arguments or debates that you can recall in your locker room as a player?
Yeah, I remember at Ohio State. I was in college when we were all watching the O.J. decision. And most people know the star white player on the team was one of my closest friends. He's defense coordinator of the Texans now, Mike Vrabel. And those guys were really disappointed. And the black players were like, But one thing I wanted to piggyback on what Coach said about this brotherhood. Started in college where, you come at Ohio State, the tradition has been there, playing football, and it's like, nothing is greater than that Buckeye. Nothing is greater than the tradition and the pride for that O that you see. But it comes down to me, it comes down not to necessarily colors, it comes down in football, it comes down to performance because football is different from basketball. Basketball players, they can go out, they can fight each other, or they may guarantee money, they can say whatever. But in football player, if Mike Vrabel misses a pulling guard on a play or something and the running back comes, I could get hurt. Football is a dangerous sport where you need that man beside you. I don't care if he's. I would love to have J.J. Watt on my team. I don't care what if he was green. I know that guy's gonna make me some money because you're gonna rush the quarterback. I'm gonna get a pick. So in football, the brotherhood is different, and I think because, like Coach said, it's 90 of us, it's 70 of us, and it's you got a guy from Wisconsin, you got a guy from L.A., you got a guy from D.C., you got a guy from Texas, and the game is so violent, and that week, that Sunday is so. 3 hours is so intensive that you just have to have that brotherhood, and you cannot win a Super Bowl. The Patriots, what they did is so amazing, and it all comes down to one, they executed, but they believed in each other so much.
So the main body that kind of tracks media diversity, the Associated Press, sports editors, they keep statistics and they get analyzed, and consistently. Something like 90% of sports editors are white. More than 80% of reporters and columnists are white. These statistics seem that the industry covering sports is not very diverse, and yet the NFL is almost 70% black. The NBA 75% black. does that affect how we view sports, how the public view sports, the lack of diversity in the coverage?
How can it not? That's why I sort of chuckle at this idea that sports writing, sports journalism has become a liberal profession. I'm like, have you seen the statistics? Like, it's clearly not to some degree. When I was a columnist at the Orlando Sentinel, I was the only black female sports columnist at a North American daily newspaper, 1 out of 305, right? So that's not to say that somebody who is white can't understand how to cover black athletes or can't relate or can't properly cover them, but it is to say that when certain issues of race or gender or even complexities that people are dealing with from the cities that they come from, much like if you lack gender diversity, regional diversity, racial or ethnic diversity, religious diversity, it's going to impact how you cover certain athletes. And I think whenever these conversations come up, we're immediately aware of the difference and why that diversity matters. Whether it be with Colin Kaepernick or Trayvon Martin in the Miami Heat, or when these issues bubble up, we're reminded about just, frankly, how white the sports media profession is. And I think even now, with the rise of digital media and blogging, in some respects, it's taken a step back. When I was coming up in this business, you had a lot of different newspapers, and they had internship programs. A lot of them were trying to focus on recruiting minorities in particular, but a lot of these websites, they don't have to focus on that, especially because many of them, they're, starting from somebody who had their own seed money, so they hire all their friends, and then next thing you know, you look around digital media and it's pretty white. I mean, thank God for the Undefeated, because when you look at some of the other major sites, it's just not a lot of diversity there. So, and no reason to cultivate that talent. And I've often told people at ESPN this and in other places, diversity isn't going to just knock on your door. It's not going to come and say, it's diversity. Hi. Like, you have to actually go out and recruit people, cultivate people, invest in people the same way you would any other people you already have on staff.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, a coach, that in terms of just your interaction back in the day, did you notice, was there any difference with, say, black reporters coming to you, Sean, versus white, and the same with you, Coach?
Yeah, those numbers are stunning to me, because the first question would be, well, why is it that way? I'll translate it into my profession. We have, because I'm asked about this all the time, we have, I think, 8 or 9 minority head coaches in the league, which means there are 24 coordinator positions. That's always the topic. We just lost, Andrea, noted we lost Mr. Rooney, who originated the Rooney Rule. Ozzie Newsome, who I worked with in Baltimore, was a big part of that, which is basically a conduit that they created in terms of the league trying to raise the profile of minority coaches to the level where they could be legitimately thought of as head coaching candidates. And I'm asked all the time about my hiring practices and what I looked at when I would hire a coordinator. And I keep coming back to the point that there are 8 minority head coaches now, means 24 coordinator positions. And I'm within striking distance here. 4 or 5 are held by minorities. So it goes, I think, in part and parcel with what we're talking about. That would be a question for those coaches, that what does not exist in the pool of coaching profession to choose from, that we have so few minority coordinators, because that's the conduit to become a head coach, assistant coach, then a coordinator. That's where you typically pull your head coaching candidates from. With all that's been done, Rooney Rule's been in existence for, I think, 15, maybe close to 20 years. The league puts a lot of time and energy in trying to promote that, but yet, not that there's X amount of numbers of minority head coaches, but when among the pool of minority head coaches, there's such a small percentage of their coordinators are minorities. And I don't have an answer for that. I don't know what their response would be to go, I know what they'll tell you. Well, the 2 guys I hired were the best available guys. Okay, then it bears the question, why were they the best available guys? What are we not doing to make more minority coaches the best available guys to put into those positions.
Well, Coach, wouldn't you say typically you hire the people you know, you're comfortable with? Like, you got to speak on that, right?
Yeah, but by the same token, you got to, most of my coaching staff were African American. Ozzie Newsome, I worked with, and I don't say this other than just in terms of my reference point, when I would go to hire a coach, Marvin Lewis was my defensive coordinator, Ozzie Newsome was my general manager. My agent went to the league office that I knew at Stanford, that now's the athletic director at ASU, all African American, and the majority of my staff was African American. So the access that I had to quality coaches was there, and then when I would go to choose whoever was going to be at the coordinator level. So I think there's plenty of interaction, and there are plenty of candidates. But what I bring up is just what you're talking about. That number in the media is stunning to me, and I don't have an answer for it any more than I do in the coaching profession in this day and age, why there aren't more minority sports writers, and particularly now, since it's not just generated by the big corporate with all the blogs and everything. You know, a lot of people can start up a lot of different. I don't have an answer for it, but I think it's consistent with what's going on.
So with the Rooney Rule, there's never been more than 25% minority representation in coaching ranks, and there are currently no team president, which is another question. So to Sean's point, maybe to Jamel's about the intentionality of trying to make that happen. You know, you were, as you mentioned with Ozzie Newsome and others, did you see that kind of intention in the league among your colleagues? And what were the discussions?
Well, Sean and I were talking about it. I'll reach back into the conversation about Colin Kaepernick and the fact that he's a free agent now. And Sean and I both looked at each other, and I may be naive about it, but the competitive nature, you know, nothing personal, just business in the NFL. The issues that I know for a fact that the coaches and the organizations have with Colin Kaepernick are strictly having to do with his performance on the field. Now, they can lop in the other thing if they want to. If you want to make the case, this is how I'm not going to sign Colin Kaepernick. And if you want to close the deal and say, well, then I don't want, you know, the dreaded distraction rule. Right now, the problem with Colin Kaepernick, and Sean, you jump in as well, he can't play. He's a mess physically. Now, and I have a coach crush on Colin Kaepernick as a coach. This guy had the sweetest stroke and accuracy, the athleticism coming out. I thought this guy, he was the best to me. I coached Warren Moon and Steve Young. He was the best in the combination of those two. Well, obviously, it's gone off the rails. And to get an athlete back physically, and you can speak to this as well, that's hard to do in his career right now. So for me, Colin Kaepernick, first and foremost, is not being signed because, believe me, I keep my job by winning. And if I think this guy can help us win, I'll sign anybody. And so the issue for Colin, I've talked to 7 different people on teams that need a coordinator, need a quarterback. General manager, head coach, coordinator, quarterback coach. And I asked them the question in anticipation of this panel. Tell me about Colin Kaepernick. To a man, the critique top to bottom was his feet aren't right, his throwing. It was all about the physical play. Eventually, they got around to, could it be a distraction? Some of the other things that went with it. But for them, it was more of a clinical, here's the problem I have with him physically, him being a quarterback, rather than, geez, I don't want to go near that because of the distraction.
Well, I think the mistake we make is, when we have that discussion, is we make it seem like it's one or the other, and not not a combination. Because here's what my counter to that would be. A lot of times, what's interesting is not, when we've had these conversations before about the number of black quarterbacks, when we used to have that conversation, black starting quarterbacks in the league. The more interesting thing is who are the backups. You know why? Because the backups are all hookup positions. Let's be real, right? Mm-hmm. Guy knows coach. Guy used to work with him in this system. That's how they have a job. Can hold a clipboard, make $1 million or $2 million a year, 10 years, right? So when I look at the backups being signed, and then I ask myself, is Colin Kaepernick better than that guy? Is he? I mean, look, I understand what you said. Fundamentally, there are a lot of issues there with him physically, but you got Mike Lennon out here getting what he's getting paid. You got. I can name a number of different guys that are getting signed. Chase McDaniel, though I think they let him go. I'm not sure, but guys like that. So then it's a question of, are his physical limitations, in addition to what all comes with it, make it worth it to sign him? And to me, a really simple question to ask is, if you want to sign Colin Kaepernick, do you have to run it by the owner? And if the answer is yes, then it's not just about football.
Yeah, I will say this, and you're absolutely right. What Sean and I were talking about, and you named out some good names, and you're right. It's God bless America. To be a backup, well, I'm going to give you $10 million a year, and I'm praying to God you don't ever go in.
That's right.
That's only in America. That's awesome. And again, and maybe I'm leaning to the mercenary, nothing personal, just business side a little bit. But the names you just named, right now, no, Colin Kaepernick's not as good as they are. He should be better. He has a bigger, you can't, I'm talking strictly from a football standpoint, a guy who absolutely loved Colin Kaepernick. And it's not totally his fault, the fall off from the change of coaches, coordinators, everything that happened. Physically, technically, he's a mess. And this is a reclamation project. So as a coach, the question is, am I willing to bring that on to nurture? Do I think there's enough of an upside? And then the other stuff that you throw in, maybe that's the deal. Maybe that takes you to the next step where you're hesitant to do that. And I'm not making an excuse in any way, shape, or form that that's not an issue. And to answer your question directly, yes, and that is very telling, that you're not going to bring him on until you've made hey, here's the reasons I want to do that, because there are going to be broader questions about it, obviously, that you're going to have to handle as an organization. That's a fair observation.
So on just thinking about the depiction of black athletes, go to Ezra first, because he just did this amazing documentary, most extraordinary documentary I've seen on O.J. Simpson, O.J. Made in America. And so O.J. goes from this revered athlete, a breakthrough athlete as a black athlete in terms of being embraced by corporate America, to this incredible fall, to a murder trial, of course, acquitted, and becoming a pariah, really. And I know it's a lot of complexity in that. I wonder that how much does race have a factor in both the embrace of him as the kind of black man he was at the time, and also the hate of him after he got acquitted. And I just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Everything. I mean, certainly on the back end, I mean, I think sort of the thing that made that trial what it was the sort of sense of betrayal that I feel like the white population had with the guy that, again, it's hard to sort of speak on I don't want to paint everybody with this brush of sort of, but the notion that here was an athlete that, we let in and we embraced, and that in the end, sort of, this is what happens. And so I think on the other end of it, to go through a trial and to see how divisive this issue became, and then if this is what the story's about. You had millions of people who looked at the evidence in a case and said, well, that guy's guilty of murder. And I don't understand why there are so many people who seem invested or believe that he could be innocent. And then to have him acquitted and to see the reaction to it, I think that only sort of further, exacerbated that reaction on the part of a lot of white people. So I think race had a ton to do with it, both about O.J. specifically and who he was, how he was embraced, and sort of that feeling of, oh, okay, how he rose and this is what happened, but also sort of the confusion with how he was embraced during the trial, and sort of the reaction to the acquittal, which had nothing to do with him in many ways. And so I think in that way, it had everything to do with it.
And now, of course, he's in prison for another crime, and served a long time, and then the speculation about him being paroled, possibly. I don't know.
The better question would be, after he's acquitted and he was still of a professional football playing age, and he was still O.J. Simpson, would a team sign him then?
Well, I yeah,
Coach, you had the situation with Ray Lewis, right?
Yeah, obviously, I can equate it to two levels. One, having been the head coach with Ray Lewis when he went through the incident in the Atlanta Super Bowl, and then how we had to deal with that going forward. I was OJ's PR guy with the 49ers his last year, and I was kind of in charge. Everywhere we went, everybody wanted to give a tribute to OJ. This was his last go-round. We knew this was going to be his last year because he was basically done. And so I was put in charge of coordinating with all the cities we went into to, everybody wanted to give a tribute to OJ. So I'm not quite sure. When that was back in 1979, he was done as a player. He had nothing left as a player to give. He had obviously the brilliant career, and there was no way he was going to be able to play to go forward. With Ray Lewis, the difficulty for us, he was the only player in the history of the league that ever been indicted on murder. And the hard thing for me was I didn't have anybody to call to say, my mentors, Bill Walsh and Dan Green, well, how do I handle this? It's like, well, I got no clue. Because there's no book or manual. It was interesting for me because we made the PR decision, as good PR firm would do, to say, look, in this instance, going forward as the organization, there's got to be one voice because you're going to have issues if the owner, the general manager, the coach were addressing a different way. Well, Art Modell was our owner, and at the point in his life, old enough where it wouldn't be good to put Art in that capacity. Ozzie Newsome, for a number of circumstances, they basically said, Coach, you've got to be that voice. So I go from, and obviously wanting to support your player, and we didn't know anything more than anybody else. We thought we knew. We trusted Ray. We trusted him as a man, but we didn't know exactly what was, and we kind of learned it as we went along. And it was interesting, the transformation for me. I went from this, I went to Brigham Young University. I'm this white middle-class guy from BYU that now becomes this gang leader of thugs because I'm standing up and not necessarily, I can't say defending, but supporting this process, and to watch that transformation for all the reasons we're talking about and the way that it's viewed was a real education for me.
Was there any divisions in your locker room?
We believed in the man. Again, nobody in that room knew more, and it was interesting to go. It was all during the off season. And you talk about Colin being named what he was. I don't know what it was.
I forgot what the award is called.
But basically, it was probably captain of the year, or maybe the what was the one where
Walter Payton Man of the Year.
Yeah,
Walter Payton Man of the Year.
Yes, we believe in this guy. Fortunately, I'm talking strictly from a mercenary standpoint. We had gotten past. He had been acquitted. Actually, let's back up. He wasn't acquitted. All charges were dropped. People forget it wasn't matter. I mean, the DA never really should have brought the case. So by the time we get to training camp, the challenge for us was, and Ray got up in front of the team, the question becomes, how are we going to handle this? We were very transparent from the get-go. Ray got up there, and we gave the media, you got one chance. We're going to answer all your questions as best we can. He was still under a civil suit, so there's some limitations. And said, okay, from this point going forward, we've answered the questions. For the sake of the team, we're done addressing that. Well, that's all well and good until every time we go on the road, you pick up the Sunday morning paper, and we're in Cleveland, we're in Boston, we're in Chicago. There's Ray Lewis in the orange jumpsuit and the
then you messed around and made the Super Bowl.
Right, yeah, and that was so that's something we had, and quite frankly, it rallied us as a team because believed in Ray, and it truly became an us against the world. I always used to, when we were on the road, made a point of walking. The players go out in different, running backs go out together, pregame warm up, receive. You go out in groups. I always made a point to go out with linebackers. I wanted to be right there when Ray walked out in the field. And it was interesting, no matter where we went, we'd walk out, Ray would walk out and be right behind him. And the things that came out of people's mouths, I'm a 63-year-old man, and it made, it embarrassed me. And I got to the point where it got to be, you have no idea what you're doing. you have no idea how you're fueling this man when he comes out for a warm out, and you're saying things about him and his. I mean, you can't begin to imagine what it was, and the way that motivated him, and the way the team rallied around him, and all the way to the Super Bowl.
So to answer your question, I think is yes. I mean,
I guess so.
not necessarily using Ray as an example, but I think we see all the time so many examples of, we can use domestic violence, for example, of how those red flags take on different hues based off the talent, right?
Yeah.
We're having this conversation about Joe Mixon and, you know, where he'll be drafted. And I remember after the season ended, he's not going to get drafted. Now all of a sudden, it looks like a late first-round pick. You know, Ray Rice, obviously another player that the Ravens had to deal with. The issue wasn't, of course, video was a big part of it. But I think the other part of it was just that of where a disposable position, the perception that Ray Rice was not an elite running back anymore. And there you have it. If O.J. Simpson is in the prime of his career, he gets acquitted, I have no doubt whatsoever that an NFL team would be completely comfortable signing him.
But at this point, if O.J. Simpson does get paroled, can he work anywhere?
Wow. I mean, yeah, on a reality show. I think he'll be fine.
You know, I wondered when we went through Ray, because, again, with Ray Lewis, and he was still at the prime, and Ray was in the prime of his career. I often wonder, and everybody will remember after the Super Bowl, and Ray Lewis had like 2 interceptions and knocked down 5 passes and whatever. He should have been the MVP. He should have gone to Disneyland, and he did not. For all the reasons that you can imagine, that the corporate side said, no, we're not going to. And I wondered how long would it take for the asterisk, Ray Lewis, asterisk, indicted on murder and yada, 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 before that went away. And it's interesting, all but now having left ESPN, you know, 12, 15 years removed from that, Ray has reclaimed that and has been able to come back, and he is a corporate sponsor and those types of things. So that in itself is a case study in terms of, well, what is that shelf life and where do you go from there?
Well, here's a question. We have some questions from Twitter, from Crystal G. If Aaron Hernandez was a free man and physically in shape to play football today, would you sign him?
We're in New England, Coach. You want to take that one?
Wow.
Well,
yeah, you're obviously we're talking different levels of, you know, okay, the guy said something stupid on Twitter to obviously, and that it's probably not a fair question because of what Aaron Hernandez has been found guilty of. You look at the different levels from Ray being probably falsely accused and the way that went down, and not even close to it. And then all of a sudden, now that's a whole nother.
Well,
I'm glad I'm not coaching anymore.
Yeah. Well, Coach, you also talking about Ray was probably the best defensive player in the NFL at the time. It's too much push from the bottom to really have to deal with it nowadays. I don't think it's too many good other tight ends. You see Reed at, you know, the Redskins, same out of Florida, same type of tight end who can run, catch the ball. It's just too much push from the bottom to have to really deal with troublemakers.
So Jamel from Lerner Lou on Twitter, what's an example of reporter's race affecting his or her way of covering certain athletes?
Man, I feel like there's a ton of examples, and yet a specific one is kind of eluding me. I mean, to some degree, I think you can look at Colin Kaepernick. There are some people, again, this is the awkward and difficult position that you're in sports media now, is that you have to have such a deeper understanding of the breadth of issues that you didn't have to worry about before. So let's say you're a reporter covering Colin Kaepernick, but you had no real in-depth knowledge of police brutality, some of the things that Colin Kaepernick spoke of in the opening montage about what's going on in particular with the San Francisco Police Department. If you don't have some kind of base of knowledge for not only the current state of the issues of police brutality, but for that matter, the frayed and negative relationship that's often been there between the police and African Americans, then you're sort of going into the situation incomplete in many regards. And I think if you have no understanding of why LeBron James and the Miami Heat put on the hoodie, why they felt like, given the circumstances around Trayvon Martin's death, why it could be any of them, why black athletes feel vulnerable despite their financial status, despite their social positioning. If you don't understand that vulnerability, then you're not really doing your job as a reporter, because it's our job to understand and to comprehend and to relay and put things into context. So I think that can be one of the ways in which race impacts the way you report. Even when we have certain incidents in sports, you have, I go back, you brought up your son-in-law playing for the Pistons. I go back to the Palace Brawl, how that permanently changed the way the NBA was perceived, and even how the NBA, some of the coding around how the NBA is talked about. And look, this may be a terrible analogy, but that's clearly not going to prevent me from making it anyway. But we've had this exhaustive conversation this season about NBA players and rest, right? Baseball players take days off all the time, and managers will tell you, and granted, I get it, it's 162 games versus 82. I understand that. But there's an optic there that is also at play in the NBA that people don't want to talk about. You have a guy like LeBron James, a primarily black league. You have rich black athletes being unapologetic about taking a day off. And I think that has something to do with how some people have perceived this rest issue in the NBA. And so while I'm certainly not saying that, race in sports is built into, or race is built into everything in sports, but I think considering how deeply woven it is in our society, if you don't have an understanding of that, you may bring just a lack of perspective to your reporting.
Speaking of other sports that don't have 75% of the players black, so Saturday we'll be celebrating the 70th anniversary of Jackie Robinson breaking the color line. Jonathan Kaplan question is, taking note of that day, what do you make of the small number of black athletes in the MLB and the NHL?
A lot of that, I think, it has to do with access and opportunity.
Yes.
I'm from Detroit, and so baseball was actually my favorite sport growing up. And you look around Detroit now, and because of the economic position the city is in, ball fields aren't kept up. A lot of schools have had to eliminate their teams. Baseball is like on the verge of becoming essentially a club sport, where if you don't have the right finances, you won't be able to play it. So the access, I think, is a problem. Same thing with hockey. The equipment is expensive. And I do think, on the other side of it, there is something to be said, too, for there being a lot more star power around the NBA, for example. It's an individual sport. It's a players' league. Certainly football is the national obsession. So there's a different connection there. But I think even still, beyond that, culturally, there are some differences that I think can be a little, that can turn players off from wanting to pursue baseball. So it's a bunch of different factors. It's not just one thing, but access and economic opportunity, I think, are a huge part of the piece. And even the way the league, not just for black players, but or African-American players, I should say, I don't think Major League Baseball does the best job of promoting their stars. I mean, our columnist Jason Stark wrote a great piece about who is the face of baseball based off a recent study that was done. Still the most recognizable player is a guy that retired 2 years ago, Derek Jeter. That's the most recognizable player. And so they have a problem there if that's the case. That means they're not promoting and maybe individualizing the sport enough to connect with people.
I think to Jamel's point, it is very complicated, and there's a litany of issues. But when you think of why baseball is integrated in the first place, it's nice that we think of Branch Rickey and the great experiment of like, look, he's this liberal guy who brought in Jackie Robinson, but let's be real, he brought him in because he was cheap, and there were these black players that he looked at and said, they're going to help me win. I don't give a shit. And so now when you look at Major League Baseball, where's the cheap labor? It's in the Dominican Republic. It's in Venezuela, and this is where these academies are set up. So the game has just changed. There are plenty of baseball players of color. They just don't speak English. And, you know, and so it's just the landscape has changed. So the conversation is a little bit more nuanced, and as a result, yes, culturally in the zeitgeist in America, baseball doesn't occupy the same status as it once did.
So, Sean, you run a tech company now.
Yeah.
Retrofitting helmets and what, protective gear for the
Yes.
military. Reminded me, it's a field that maybe people don't think of, associate with black athletes necessarily, and it reminded me of something Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had said to me when I interviewed him at the National Book Festival, and he mentioned that even today, obviously he's the all-time leading scorer, but that people can't see beyond the sky hook and the basketball player, even though he's had this entire intellectual life that's really outlived his basketball career. He's written 14 books, he's columnist, but people still have him typed this way. And I just wondered, for you entering this business, this new business, how has that been for you and how you're perceived now?
It's been difficult. Let me rewind back to the Colin Kaepernick conversation. One of the things that we need to keep in mind that Colin Kaepernick is a quarterback, and that's the one position out of all sports where you're considered the leader and CEO of that team. So I remember Warren Moon, I never forget it, going to a Seattle game with Warren Moon, Sonics game, and Warren Moon said, I did this in Canada, had this many yards, but I always felt like I had to be twice as good as everyone else. And that's honestly how I feel being a young, one, I'm African-American, but two, I'm a former athlete, and I do have a college degree, and I went to a pretty good university, the Ohio State University. And any Buckeyes, I heard that, but OHIO, right. So, but, I don't have any role models. Like when Andrew Kramer sent out the sheet, who's your role model? Elon Musk. They aren't a lot of young African Americans who's in the tech world, like you bump into them every now and then, so it's very difficult. And I have to prove myself. I have to know my business twice as well as anyone else, because they're gonna be like, well, if you're the CEO, are you fiscally responsible? Do you understand your business? Do you get these type of clients? So you have to be twice as good as everyone else. And at quarterback, when you go back to Colin Kaepernick, if you're gonna speak out, dude, you got to be, one, you don't have guaranteed money, so you gotta know that you could get cut. But two, you have to be. You're not a distraction. You have to make plays, and you're just not making plays. If you're not making plays, and it's tough. So being a leader of a tech company, and I have all white employees, right? And it's, and I can tell you, sometimes walking into the room, it's like, this guy has nuclear engineers, MIT guys, and Virginia Tech guys, and they're just like shocked that I'm able to build that type of team and have that type of responsibility and do the right thing.
We're about to wrap up. I'll just throw one more question to everybody, each of you, quickly, to just say if there is an issue involving race in sports that deserves more attention and coverage, is there something that you see in that field?
If it was me, not just race and gender, I thought when Serena Williams won and they was like, is she the best female athlete? I wish ESPN and you guys, and I know you guys hit on it, I consider her top 3 athletes of all time, not just because she's a black woman. Like, she's a woman, she's just the best athlete. So I would like to see.
She said that. She said if she was a man, she would have been considered one of the best athletes like 10 or 15 years ago.
And it needs to be addressed more. That's a great point. That should be addressed more for me.
As the only minority on this panel, but seriously, I think when I hear discussions about all the things we're talking about, one of the most difficult things, and put it on a personal level that the ones I'm most involved with is the league, again, wanting to enhance minority participation, moving up. How do we do that? It's very difficult as a white man to express opinions on race for fear that those comments at any given time can be compartmentalized. That could, I'm in the media business now, work for the NFL Network, and to sit and have an honest conversation. We always talk about you got to have an honest conversation with one another. Sometimes it's very difficult for fear of what you have to say and wanting to contribute, so we can have that honest discourse isn't going to be misconstrued, because once you get that label put on you as being racist or biased or whatever, that's lethal. And we've got to expand the conversation where we can be accepting of comments without indeed labeling them one way or the other.
I'll actually expand on that in terms of something that, you know, not just in society, but I mean, just sticking to sports here. See, the problem why we're stuck in this sort of holding pattern is because I'm talked out of it. Like people of color, women, if you want to relate this to gender issues, we've been talking about this our whole lives, right? So this is nothing new for us. The question, we can't take this up anymore. We need other people to join the conversation. And until they do, and for that matter, not just joining the conversation, but to be invested in seeing it actually produce results, then we're just gonna be stuck here where, you know, you will be the only minority on panels. I always encourage people, white people in particular, to talk about race. But more importantly, when you do, just know what you're talking about. And I don't mean from a standpoint of you have to agree with everything I say, but all the answers to how we can have the conversation are in the library. They're on Google. And you can find it. Like, it's not that hard. And so if that is able to happen, maybe we get beyond the point where we don't just have more NFL coaches, we actually have more GMs and team president, and oh my goodness, an actual person of color as an NFL owner. Then we can start advancing those levels up, but it's gotta be a mutual investment. But at least from what I can see, and it's been the story of my life, and I'm sure the lives of many people in here, it's only a one-sided investment. And until that changes, we're gonna be stuck right here. I hate to be the pessimist, but that's just kind of where we are right now. I say the same thing to men when it comes to domestic violence. Me and my co-host, Michael Smith, we have this running joke because whenever, unfortunately, there's an issue with where a domestic violence incident happens, the producers at ESPN come running to me and say, hey, can you be on this show to talk about this incident that happened? And Michael chime up, yeah, you're right, because I'm pro-beating women. That's right. Don't come talking to me, right? It's like, yeah, no, don't talk to me about it, you know? And so that's what I'm saying is it can be a more powerful message if you have a man, you know, speaking up on behalf of women or championing women, and as opposed to highlighting the Mike Francescas of the world. Like, that's more powerful when you have other allies actually taking an active role in seeing the success of people of color.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ezra. I'll give you the last word, but
I
quickly.
don't have to have the last word, but what I will say is that I will support what Brian said in terms of the need in general for empathy on both sides to understand people's perspectives. And then from the standpoint of what Jamel said, I mean, I think that this representation conversation is never going to end, and the numbers and, you know, as sports writers you're talking about are abysmal. I don't know what the current number is in terms of you being the lone female black sports
It's still pretty bad, and it's even worse when you take ESPN out of
but this is what I was going to say. It's like, as you know, pleased as I am that the Undefeated exists, and that's an important voice for African Americans to what you focus on a daily basis, and something that I read on a daily basis. But it's also an example of an increasingly fractured media landscape where, like, I can go and read the Undefeated because that's what I'm interested in, but I don't know that I'm reading the sort of what's another perspective that who's might have a different viewpoint. And so the idea that Michael and Jamel, for instance, have a platform every day on a network that exists on televisions all over America, in airports, black and white, are looking at, to me, is one of the more important things because it's a gradual thing. I mean, I don't know when there's going to be a black owner. I am as cynical as you. But this conversation will subtly change when you're seeing people who don't look like you talking about things in a nuanced way. That is going, and I'll use even myself as an example of having just made this documentary. Like, a lot of people made movies about OJ. And, you know, I made a movie about OJ, and the way I did it was based on the way I see the world. And so the perspective that sort of I brought to that, in turn, people look at this and go, oh, I didn't think about this in this way. I didn't understand that there were so many people who were looking at these issues. Now I understand this history and this context, and that only comes when people of a different perspective have the opportunity to have that voice.
Well, thanks to the panel here, Sean Springs, Brian Billick, Jamel Hill, and Ezra Edelman. Thank you very much. Our speakers will be available at the Career Cafe for a few minutes. A few minutes, Susan, 10 minutes. 10 minutes, so come talk to him quickly. Next panel up, come back 10 minutes for the gender panel.